Hello everyone, and welcome to the unboxing of Umbraco 14. Calling it the next major doesn't quite seem to cut it for this release. Perhaps grand major is more appropriate. It's definitely a major step forward for the project. In this video, we're going to tell you what you need to know about what this release brings us, what's changed and why, what hasn't changed, and considerations for you for when you can think about starting using it. To help me in this endeavour, I'm joined by my two colleagues, Bjarke, Head of CMS and Backend Team Lead. Hello, Bjarke.
Hey.
And Jacob, Front-End Team Lead and Architect. Hello, Jacob.
Hello.
First of all, congratulations. I imagine you're both pretty delighted to have reached this milestone.
Definitely. It's been a year for multiple years, a project for multiple years.
Jacob, are you the one who gets to press the magic button? Is there a magic button?
Well, actually, we go into a normal release mode, so we have a schedule for that and a whole list of checks to do before release.
So in my head, it's like a NASA rocket launch. So is it like a NASA rocket launch?
Yes.
Cool. Oh, well done on releasing the rocket. So now that the rocket is released, V14 is out, what do people need to know? A short description of this release is that it's the new back office, known as Bellissima, but that significantly underplays what version 14 is bringing us. I think everyone understands technical debt and legacy code that can weigh down a code base and hamper progress. And I think having had an AngularJS back office for over 10 years, we definitely were hitting that. So I think it's fair to say, Bjarke and Jacob, that we've taken this rare opportunity to do some significant re-architecting of the project. Bjarke, perhaps you could start explaining, and I should have a slide that I can show to help you explain the new architecture.
Yes, so let's just start in the top. Umbraco CMS version 14 is still built on .NET 8, which is the latest long-term supported version of .NET by Microsoft. And out of box, it still ships with the MVC pattern and Razor views, which you can build your entire website off. But the last couple of years, we have started adding headless APIs. In Umbraco 12, the content delivery API and media delivery APIs was added, and in 13, they were enhanced. Now in 14, we also introduce a management API, and this is a very big API compared to the delivery APIs. I think if I can count correctly, we have 310 endpoints in the management API, so it's a pretty big one. And the obvious use of this management API is the new back office, but we actually have multiple clients already because we also use the management API for our acceptance test suite. So it uses the management API to set up the expected content before it starts the test. But obviously this is not shipped, so this diagram only shows what is shipped. And Jacob, maybe you can take us through the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, as of in terms of downplaying stuff, the back office is in a very in the very corner of this diagram. And even though it might be the biggest project that Umbraco HQ has ever undertaken, it's still in the big scheme of things just a client for the management API. And I think you mentioned before, Bjarke, that it's the client that we've been using to battle test the management API as well. And yeah, the back office obviously is very big. So if you zoomed in on that quadrant, it would explode in all sorts of services and APIs, and we'll dive into that later. But in the big scheme of things, this is what it looks like. It's a way you can see Umbraco moving towards headless first in this way, and having APIs between the backend and the front end.
So Bjarke, I think if you could now talk a bit more about the management API, I'm going to hand over the screen to you.
Yeah, I'll try to share my screen then. All right, so the management API, as I said, it consists of 310 endpoints, so it's quite a lot. If you scroll down here. One of the cool things is it's completely aligned and uniformed, so all responses are done using system text JSON, which is the new JSON library from Microsoft that was introduced in .NET 6. Compared to earlier stages where each endpoint had their own configuration of how it would return. So some of them was camel case, some of them was Pascal case, and so on. Now it's completely uniformed. We already had Swagger available, so now we have this new definition for the management API. We have authorization, so I can authorize. And yeah, I was already signed in, but this will actually open the Umbraco backoffice login screen. And when you sign in, it will do it. But this case, I already had a cookie. We have changed the authentication to be more API friendly. So instead of cookie-based authentication, it's now token-based, which is what the Swagger client is using here. And talking about authentication and authorization, we had to figure out a way to do this in an API-first approach. So instead of having one endpoint giving all the configurations from the app settings, we have divided it into multiple smaller endpoints. So I'll try to search for config. Like here we have a document type configuration, and it only shows what is relevant in that case and have permissions that let you see it if you have access to the document type. So everything is divided into the silos, like blueprints, document type, document versions, document, you name it. And another thing we have looked into regarding authorization is what we call viewports. So we actually have some collection views, which is a different viewport. We have some items endpoint, or 3 endpoints here, where I can get a small configuration, or small, not configuration, small model of this document given the IDs. So this is the use case for pickers. Maybe I want to get the user representation given an ID, and then maybe I'm only allowed to get the name and not any of the details that I would have been able to get if I had actually access to the user section. We also aligned, so all endpoints that are returning lists are now using a skip take pattern. The skip take pattern is the most flexible one. We also decided, we talked about using just a page number and page size like we used to, but we actually had 3 different versions. We also sometimes had a 0 indexed page index, I think it was called. So we decided to go with skip take. It's the most flexible one, and some of the endpoints already support skip take. If you do a weird request like give me 201 items and skip 15, that is supported. Some of them are still in the service layer using paging, so it needs to be convertible. But by doing it this way, we can in the future enhance this without making breaking changes to the API contract. Another cool thing to note is that all the IDs are actually GUIDs. So we are not exposing the integer IDs, which is basically owned by the database. This also means that when you create new items, you can specify what ID you expect it to have, which is a cool thing for the future. The last thing I want to cover, I think, here is some of these endpoints have been divided, which was a bigger endpoint in the earlier version, because all APIs need to make sense from a transactional point of view. Either it needs to succeed or it needs to roll back. So a use case like document save and publish, maybe I can find it here, publish and create have now been or update have now been divided, because Umbraco actually supports it's possible for you to save a document which is not valid for you to publish yet, if it's work in progress. So saving is logically a transaction that makes sense and succeed, and then the client afterwards call publish, which maybe don't succeed, and thereby it makes sense from a transactional point of view. The last thing I will show is profiling, because when we think of it as an API first approach, the old way profiling worked don't really make sense. It only showed up inside back office or inside your website part. Now we have an endpoint. Obviously the back office also have the UI for this, but I can try to enable, and I can try another one. And now we actually have, that was maybe the wrong one. Yeah, it was an old one. So now I can deep dive into what it did. Partial views was a boring example because it doesn't do anything to the database. Member types, maybe it's more interesting. So here we can get all the database queries that was executed and actually try to dive into what is going on during a request. So here we just rely on a mini profiler as we used to do, but this is the representation of mini profiler from an API first point of view. I think that was what I want to cover about the new management API. So I'll stop sharing if I can find a stop share button.
So am I right in thinking that when we're writing our own controllers in the back office, we would be able to get those, our own endpoints, we'd be able to get those published on Swagger as well? In the same way.
That is, if you just make a pure ASP.NET Core web or API controller, then it will show up. So we had, maybe you remember, we had 3 definitions. We had one just for default. Everything that picks up all ASP.NET Core API controllers that haven't been mapped to any other. So they will just show up there.
Cool. So basically we're just going to live in Swagger. I mean, I assume everyone uses Swagger already, right? We used to have to add it as a library. Is it now baked into Microsoft, or is it still a...
I think it's still an external package.
Yeah. Jacob, thank you, Bjarke. Jacob, perhaps you would like to talk. Apparently you've been a bit busy doing some new stuff in
Some would say yes. I mean, now that Bjarke and his team has delivered such a nice new API, I mean, we thought we'd build a new client to actually use the API, and time was right to do so anyway. I mean, I just checked AngularJS. As you know, the old back office used AngularJS, so I just checked it out, and I mean, Google announced the retirement of AngularJS way back in January of 18, and we began this project sort of in 2020 with the first RFC, and then 21 sort of the initiation of the UI library, which was sort of the first step to move the UI out into its own library, so we could use that for new back office, which then began in 22. So that also means my entire career at Umbraco HQ has been about building the new back office. I started in January 22. So, and that's why I'm actually so happy that it's finally here. And I prepared a video just to show some of the cool new features. I mean, this stuff doesn't at all cover the extent of what we can do in the back office. But I'm gonna play it here. I'm just gonna talk a little bit over it. So I'm using Writer here to set up a new solution and using the .NET templates to add Umbraco. And this is obviously sped up, but just creating a new document type just to get everything set up and to be able to show something on the website. So as you see, much of the UI looks like the old back office if you have that in your head, but we ideally want people to say, oh, what actually changed when they go in here? And why did it take 2 years to build? If they say that, we know we have succeeded. But as you saw, there was we showed a website front end actually, so with one of the property editors. And so here I'm just adding an RCL to the project. This is where I'm going to host some extensions. And in order to build extensions, we ideally want to use Vite with web components through a library called lit. This is also what the back office itself has been built with. And so this was the setup of Vite. Vite is a bundler that supports TypeScript through other libraries. So it's basically a bundle of configurations of other builders, and it all comes together into from TypeScript into JavaScript, and they have some presets set up for lit as well. So what we get here initially is a counter element just to test it out, and so to show that in Umbraco, we need to register it through the new package manifest system. And this is now called Umbraco package.json. So the equivalent in v13 would be package.manifest, but now it's a JSON file. So you already have IntelliSense out of the box, and we can register all sorts of extensions here. So there's actually no server extensions available, so to say. They have to be registered through this file. My first try here with the dashboard actually resulted in it didn't render a dashboard. So to mitigate that, I'm going into the docs here, the V14 docs, which has a nice tutorial how to set up a custom dashboard. And I copied some of the code over from there, and then pasted it in. And it turns out it still didn't work. I missed the reference to the RCL. So you have to link the RCL to the web project. And there we go. Now it shows up. So that's it's not a dashboard in its pure sense, as I just put in the example element. But you on this dashboard you can actually access everything in the back office that you used to. So all sorts of services and contexts are now available sort of in a global scope. So say if you wanted to access the users or the members or something to show in a dashboard, you could pull in the member context, member repository or the user repository, and then iterate through and that we sort of wrap all of the endpoints that Bjarke showed before into what we call repositories. So you can spin them up and then request the items through that, and you don't have to be concerned about caching or anything. We'll do that if you stick to using our repository pattern. You can have access to the same data that we have through the management API. But just showing another kind of extension type here, a property editor. So if we wanted to add a custom property editor to our page, that's of course possible. So what I'm doing is building a new element file for that, which is also a web component. And we also have a nice tutorial for that available on the docs. So I copied over some of the code here because I didn't want to do all of the tutorial in this short video. But initially, we wanted to render a property editor that just says I'm a property editor. And at the beginning, it also had a lot of warnings, like because there are some import statements here that it doesn't know where they're coming from. So I've installed a package called Umbraco CMS / backoffice, which is published on NPM, which gives me intelligence for all of the backoffice types, and that's a new thing as well, that we now out of the box support TypeScript for the backoffice. I know there's been some community efforts in the past, and none of them have really covered all of the backoffice. But we do now. It's shipped by default every time we release a new version of the CMS. It will also release a corresponding version on NPM with the backoffice types with the same version number. So you can go on NPM and always be up to date and know at build time if your extensions or packages are supposed to work on this version. So registering the property editor in the same manifest file makes it show up. And if we then want to do something with the property editor, so here I copied over some code with an input field, and there's a listener for every time you do an input to send out an event to say, here's the value of the property editor you set. So rebuilding that, and oh yeah, let's add a watch mode to read as well, because I don't want to restart the build all the time. It didn't actually load. Turns out that I accidentally imported all of the backoffice types, so I just need to tell my builder to avoid those. And we should see the property editor showing up here. There we go. So there's an input field. And what I can do is save a value, reload, and it's still there. So with quite a few lines of code, I managed to save a value to the database. And here I hooked on to one of the built-in types of Umbraco. It's called umbraco.textbox, which just treats it as a string and saves it to the database. So this was a property editor UI, which is an important distinction to make. Before we had just property editors, but we now have property editor schemas and property editor UIs. And the UI can be attached to one schema, but the schema can have several UIs. So a really good example of that is on the server, we have one schema for rich text, so umbraco.rich text. And on the client, we have the implementation of the rich text editor, which is done through TinyMCE. So the UI of that is called Umbraco rich text editor TinyMCE UI. And one could imagine having other rich text editors side by side with that in the future, but they would all save into the same data editor on the server and use the same data value converters on that, because in the end it's HTML, but the implementation details in the client matter. And that's why we have the UI in the client, so you can bind config to the UI, which has nothing to do with the schema. So for instance, TinyMCE has a whole toolbar that we want to configure, but only for TinyMCE. If we bind other rich text editors in the future, we don't want them to have to manage the configuration of TinyMCE. They can build their own on top of that. But some of the options will be shared, so you can put those on the schema still and validate those on the backend even, and they will all sort of be merged together in the client. So so that's I mean, that's a very quick walkthrough of property editor UIs. If we look back at V13, I mean, it was still kind of easy to register a property editor, and what you ended up with was an HTML template and an AngularJS controller, and through that controller you could access the all services in AngularJS. So you had a lot of space inside the controller scope of a property editor. Now with web components, you have even more possibilities. You have full access to what we call the context API, So you can consume any context that we expose, and even contexts that are exposed by packages you might install. A context could be the notification context. If you want to show a bubble in the corner of the back office, you do that through the notification context. So you consume that and you can send a message out that will then be shown. So it works with events natively in the browser. But the next thing I want to show here is entry points. And this is sort of where, when you start having loads of extensions, you don't want to update the Umbraco package file all the time. That's cached anyway, so you have to restart the server if you update it a lot. And so we have a concept of loading a JavaScript module up front. It's called entry point, and you register it in the package file as well, but that will actually normally be the last time you have to touch this file. So I create a new TypeScript file that exports a function called onInit, and this function is called as soon as the back office spins up. It gets two parameters and two arguments. One is the host element, and the other is the extension registry. And through this extension registry, I can register the same stuff that I had in the Umbraco package file. So I'm actually more or less just copy pasting what I had in the package file into this TypeScript file instead. And now I have full typing as well on the manifests that I'm registering. So a property editor UI will actually tell me how exactly to register a property editor. So you can see the little red squiggly lines informs me what I might be missing. And by building that, and I have to change the name of the file, but I'm building that, and you should still be able to see the property editor as well as the dashboard. That went a little fast, but I removed them from the package file, and they still showed up. So that's entry points. So now, because I have two extensions already, it makes sense to have an entry point, I think. But you can obviously still keep using the Umbraco package file if you want. But it gives me a lot of control when to register extensions even. I can, because I'm now in a JavaScript module, I can base it off of everything I can access with JavaScript, be it something for the user or even some contexts available to the client. So I could, for instance, here check if the user is an administrator before registering an extension. So that could be a dashboard that should only show up for administrators, would be possible to register in this fashion. The last thing I want to show here is a Workspace View. They were previously known as content apps. And I believe content apps is sort of, you could register it more or less. It was built for content, and then it sort of didn't land on other workspaces, such as users or members or stuff like that. But there you could register dashboards instead, and we now try to unify it a bit. So a workspace is just what you see, like a workspace editor. If you click a document, that's called a workspace. If you click a user, that's called a workspace. And so workspace views are the little apps you have in the top right corner. So if we want to build an app like that, register it through the manifest again. So I still see red lines informing me what to do. Oh yeah, and conditions. Well, I copied over the condition from one of the dashboards, but that doesn't really work here because that was section-based and this is more workspace-based. So conditions are a new thing as well for extensions, where you can, a condition is a JavaScript module in itself. You can build your own conditions, and we ship with some default conditions such as Workspace View and section alias, and you can use those to hook into when and where to show your dashboard or Workspace View. But I'm going to remove it here because I just want to demo it. So it actually means that my Workspace View, oh yeah, no, I forgot to put in a type, so it didn't build. but now it showed up, and so I have an element here, which is it consumes a context. So this context is actually rather interesting. It's called the document workspace context. And because this workspace view I know is inside a document, I can consume that context directly. And the context should be thought of as sort of a layer around whatever view I'm having. So I can, through this context, access my properties. And one of the properties I added was called suggestions. That's the alias of the custom property editor I built. And so what I want to do is actually show the value of that live in my workspace view. So as I type, I can more or less see the value when I click over to the workspace view. So let's go to the back office and check that out. So first reload, you see the value I saved is already there, value from property : high. And if I go in and change that value, and now notice I'm not saving anything, just writing hello, and it's already updated on the workspace. So that's a really cool way to access the context of where you are located, sort of in a programmatic way, and you can act depending on that content, on the values of those properties. So at least from my point of view, these are some really, really cool new, well, they're not new, but they are really changed since V13 into something I find very, very useful for modifying and extending the back office. And there are loads and loads of extension types, many more than you had available in V13. So it's just go to the docs and check it out, look through our tutorials and give it a try and learn how to extend the Umbraco back office.
Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate we gave you quite a tall order there of just tell us everything about the new back office. And you type really fast, she says, acknowledging it was sped up. I think I think it's fair to say that we've been doing a lot through hacking up until now, of kind of in the back office, just getting things to work by doing it this way, whereas it feels now this is a far more intentional, organized, some people don't like the phrase, but modern front-end way of building applications, right? You can build proper applications when you're extending your own back offices or creating packages and have your own front-end workflows that will work. So yes, we should be making front-enders happy, right?
Yeah, that's at least what we are hearing, and also without scaring other developers away, but opening up the possibilities for new developers to enjoy Umbraco. And obviously, yeah, I was very opinionated here. I stuck to what we used to build the back office with, that is TypeScript and lit. But we don't expect people to be opinionated about it. I mean, they can bring their own if they want. They can stick to JavaScript. They don't have to use TypeScript. They can stick to native web elements, web components. They don't have to use lit. They can even use other frameworks if they choose. But I also have to say we had to make a choice for the documentation, for the sake of the documentation. So we stuck with our own tooling around and just, you know, build the tutorials up around those. So if you,
yeah, that makes sense. And I know there is a learning curve for the people who've been extending the back office. Traditionally have been C# developers, and of course now you will need to be swatting up on some of the front end technologies, or get more front enders in your agency to do the work. But from what we're hearing from people, yes, there's a learning curve, but once you're through that, it's actually a really good development workflow, and you feel like you are building something proper rather than, as I say, just sort of hacking stuff in. So we look forward to seeing seeing, as you say, other people's implementations as well, as it doesn't have to be done in the way that we've done it. As I'm sure everyone appreciates, with such a technology shift and change in architecture, we are introducing some breaking changes with this release. And I'd just like us to go through some of the most important ones now. So in terms of in your own implementation, a big one, I guess, I heard you mention it earlier, Bjarke, changing in the JSON serialization.
Yeah, so potentially a big one. So Microsoft have introduced System Text JSON, I think it's 2 years ago, together with .NET 6. And this is their effort to make a JSON library. Before that, everybody in C# world actually used Newtonsoft JSON. But Microsoft have hired the author of that one, and he have been part of building this new one. It is built with performance and security in mind. So it is it's faster. It's a bit more strict. So out of box, you need to write valid JSON for it to accept it. You can't decide yourself that you want to use single quote for strings or something, which was actually possible in Newtonsoft JSON. But if you implement things, you will also need new attributes. If you use the Newtonsoft JSON attributes to guide how serialization and deserialization works, or if you relied on the built-in .NET serialization ones, I think it's called data member attribute, those are not supported by System Text JSON. If you want to override the defaults, which we don't do in Umbraco ourselves, but then you can actually do it using their new attributes.
And I think, is it fair to say that this change was where a fair bit of unknown issues were hit? What is it? I hear there's a lot of silent failures when you're converting from this.
Yes. So I usually compared with how browsers behaved 30 years ago in Netscape times. It tried to understand what you tried to do in JavaScript and execute it as after best effort, instead of just failing fast and say do it correctly. So this is kind of the same situation here.
Fair enough. We have the Umbraco API controller, which the breaking change, I guess, is it's now camel-cased URL.
Yeah, so this implementation was heavily relying on the Newtonsoft JSON and a custom configuration of how this worked. We decided to go with the native implementation or native configuration of System Text JSON. So out of box, these endpoints will return in the same way as the management API will. But if you're relying on something, Haskell case or whatever it could be, then you will need to be aware of this.
Okay. Smidge, the compression library, is that the right term?
Yeah, bundling and minification library.
That's right, yeah.
So this was used by the old backoffice and could actually take packages that was not modified or minified or bundled and optimize during runtime. Obviously, it took some time at boot time. But we don't use that anymore. As Jacob showed, we are using Veed and do these things at compile time instead. If you rely on this on your website part, you can bring in the dependency yourself.
Yeah, or do something different.
Yeah.
And then here's my favorite phrase to say: client-side config, now manage client-side. Because I think it's fair to say quite a lot of client-side stuff wasn't. Jacob, would you like to explain some more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's rather a simple explanation, to be honest, because now that we're communicating through a management API, we found a lot of configurations on the server side that doesn't really align with a management API. So we'd need some kind of global endpoint to put in configurations on the server and then try and translate those on the client. I guess would have been our best option. But in fact, we just decided let's try and do extension points instead. for the things that you used to be able to do through app settings. And a really good example of that is TinyMCE, which wasn't even called TinyMCE on server side. It was called Rich Text Editor and Rich Text Editor configuration. But it only worked with TinyMCE. So we thought, well, let's just make an extension point and call that TinyMCE plugin. So this is what you can do now in the manifest files I showed before. You can register this TinyMCE plugin, and that gives you access to the TinyMCE instance on the page. And so you can use the whole context API to modify the configuration when you desire to do that. So if you wanted to modify it globally, you just put in the plugin and do the configurations, and you're done. If you do rely on server-side stuff, well, you are free to build an endpoint and just call that through this plugin. So you can sort of do a lot more than you used to. You're no longer bound by whatever we put in the configuration model on the server. You can configure TinyMCE how you see fit. And so it goes with other configuration options as well that used to be in app settings. They will now either be extension points or CSS variables or other sort of in that vein.
Makes sense. We've removed some things which we told you were going. So macros and partial view macros, those have gone. They're being replaced by blocks in RTEs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
we have
basically
blocks everywhere.
So basically macros have been having alternatives for many years, except of that use case if you used it inside the RTE. So we introduced that in Umbraco 13 and obsoleted it, and now it's removed. Blocks are at least as powerful, especially if you combine it with an ASP.NET Core View component. But we don't recommend that. We recommend to have view logic in the views only, because then it also works in a headless approach. And that was one of the challenges with macros out of box. They haven't been supported in a good way in the headless approaches.
Yeah, makes sense. And you implement them in the same way that you're used to implementing blocks anyway. So it's just reusing skills you already have. I've slightly plot spoiled by showing the second item already, removing XPath.
Yes, XPath have been part of a track that runs simultaneously with the new backoffice, where we try to untangle the management API, or at least the underlying services, from the published cache. So the end goal is to be able to run the management API without having to cache all content in memory. And yeah, XPath was one of the blockers for that. So XPath have alternatives for if you used it in the multi-node tree picker. We introduced dynamic routes in Umbraco 13. For many years, we have had the last chance content finder as an alternative for the configuration of 404 pages. And there are plenty of design time options if you rely on them on the published cache. And it's fair to say that the implementation since 8 have been suboptimal. So this was a perfect solution back when the published cache was actually XML. But since then, it had only been a subset of XPath that was supported, and again, relying on everything in memory, because otherwise it would have taken hours to figure out.
The next two are two removed property editors, nested content and grid layout, which have been replaced by blocks, as we discussed earlier. And the legacy media picker is gone finally as well, because we're starting V14, we're starting Bellissima with no deprecated property editors.
Yeah.
You might have picked, yeah, it is a good start, a nice fresh start. You might have picked up from Jacob's moments earlier that if you are extending the back office, then, well, I guess you could use AngularJS, right? We just said anyone can use any front end, but hopefully you wouldn't use such an old technology. We have removed AngularJS, And Jacob, you explained as well that package.manifest files have gone.
That's right.
And translations now, I'm very used to doing translations in an XML file. That's not the way anymore, is it?
Well, not for the client. You can still do it server side in XML files, but if you want any client translations, you have to provide a JavaScript module.
Okie dokie. We would very much recommend using the Umbraco UI library, and hopefully it should be quite straightforward if you're just using the simple elements. So if you're using button, you change it to UI button. Is there more to it than that, Jacob?
Well, we have the simple ones, yeah, as you said, box, button, input, and so on. But you can go to uui.umbraco.com and find all sorts of elements.
And so really, we're hoping that you'll find any element that you're going to need in order to build your own
Yes.
customization, and then it will all look just part of the back office as one nice coordinated product. And we have new icons as well. How do we say this? Lucid?
Yeah, Lucide. I haven't decided yet.
The icons have been mapped. So in terms of if you've used icon names, then those should be mapped to their new equivalent in the new icon pack.
I think we were able to find 9 out of 10 icons, the equivalent of those in Lucide, but some icons are slightly different, and obviously the how do you say, the design of the icons is different as well. But
so they will.
But the names of the icons should be mapped from V13 to 14.
Great. And there is a nice thorough document page on the documentation which goes through all of the breaking changes that we've sort of run through very quickly here on the docs. So if people want to need to know more information, please go and check that, and there'll be links through to all the specific pages in the documentation to help people as much as we can to get their heads around what will have changed in this release. A popular question is, of course, when is it right to start using any new release? There's a good old, we haven't said LTS and STS, I don't think yet in this video. Version 13 is the current LTS and is supported until the end of 2026. So that is the current LTS. And as ever, it depends on the project whether you should stay using LTSs or whether you should start with the short-term support releases.
Yeah,
I think that's no right or wrong answer for that, is there?
No.
In terms of packages, we know that at the time of release, the packages that are used in Umbraco Cloud, because Umbraco Cloud version 14 will be ready on release day. Umbraco Forms and Umbraco Deploy will be ready. Umbraco Commerce and Umbraco Workflow coming pretty soon after. I think there are releases out, pre-releases out.
Yeah, I would expect that. At least at our pre-releases feed, they will be available.
So they'll be coming soon, and somewhat later will be the UI Builder, Umbraco UI Builder package. As for community packages that are ready, Kevin Jump is hopefully continuing his USync tradition of doing a release on the same day. We know other community package developers have got packages already tested and working on the RCs, and so we expect to see those released. Secret, we're actually recording this a little while before the release day, so I think the best thing is to go to the marketplace and just see what packages are available there. And then one other thing to just acknowledge, I think at this point, is the version 14 is not 100%, does not have 100% feature parity. Jacob, perhaps you could talk a bit more on that.
Yes, I mean, we'd ideally like to ship the best version possible that we can ship. And in doing so, we stumbled across a number of features in V13 that we deemed not really up to par for a migration per se. Some features we'd ideally like to revamp and come up with a new to make the experience even better. A good example of that would be tours. So in V13, you can go to the help menu and find tours there, which can walk you through the UI. And this was very heavily bound to the way AngularJS worked. So we deemed it well, too big of a task to migrate outright. We'd ideally like to come up with how to do it, how to build it in, bake something like that into the back office to work with all of the elements we now have and the services and all sorts of stuff, and make that the best possible experience. And so it goes for a few other stuff. Yeah, some features here and there. You might have expected to see, or you might not even remember they were there, and they will then land up shortly in minor versions.
And we expect to see those, a bit more information in the release blog post about those. One thing I'd like us to talk about is if you are deciding to stay on V13 for longer, it is the LTS, as we say, that's a very valid approach to take. Are there things that people could be doing now to make it easier for as and when they upgrade to V14, V15? So we've pulled a couple of things out here. Obviously, we've discussed the features that are disappearing. So the sooner you start migrating away from those features, the better, and no reason why you can't start doing that now. In your controllers, moving your logic out of your controllers into the services, which we all know is best practice anyway, but let's be honest, we all just, let's just do it in the controller, it's only 5 lines of code. But I think that's been happening a lot in the core, hasn't it, Bjarke?
Indeed. So we had too much logic in the controllers because, as you said, sometimes it's easier. But we have moved that logic into the service layer. We are utilizing the attempt pattern that have been around in Umbraco for many years to actually communicate back all these possible outcomes, whether it be the item was not found, or it could have been cancelled by a notification, all kind of things that can happen. So now we can communicate that back from the service layer using statuses. And yes, you also clicked, so the Umbraco API routes, we would recommend, instead of using Umbraco API controller, which we already mentioned in breaking changes are behaving a little bit different, you can just use plain ASP.NET Core controllers and mark them as an API controller, which is also native ASP.NET Core. Then it will show up in the Swagger manifest under the default definition. And you can even move it to your own with only 20 lines of code. And we recommend doing that if you are a package author. Thereby, you can generate your models in the JavaScript or in the TypeScript based on that definition, and only those you need, instead of extending the management API or whatever.
Okay. And when we're talking about extending the back office, I think, Jacob, this is a recommendation, isn't it? To split.
But yeah, as for extensions as well as packages, I suppose you might have a lot of logic lying around in AngularJS controllers. So your point again, actually move the business logic out into services or JavaScript modules, and keep them there, because that'll match, or that'll migrate more easily to the new back office. And you should probably start using RCLs as well for static assets. So if you split your code into like a client library, you have your static assets there, and then RTL, that's your JavaScript and your JavaScript files, CSS, images, stuff like that. And then your C# code can potentially remain in another library. So that gives you also the opportunity to have one RTL for v13 and another RTL for upcoming Umbraco versions. So you can keep both of them alive.
That makes sense. Razor class libraries for the win. And I think because we're using the term extensions to refer to both customizing a single instance of Umbraco, but also when you're building packages. That term, am I right, now refers to both activities?
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm just appreciating, it's like the new back office is built as one big package, right? Just to go back to the old terminology, but in terms of anything that you're doing in the new back office now and how you're interacting with the management APIs, there's no reason why we can't use it in our own Umbraco implementations. Yeah,
we don't cheat in any way. We are not getting handed anything by the server. Everything we do is through the management API.
So if we can see anything being done in the back office, we should be able to work out how to do the equivalent ourselves and not hit into any of those.
We actually like to call that the extension first architecture. So all things in the back office are also extensions that are being registered on boot of the back office. And so whatever you see in the back office, you should be able to replicate and even remove our stuff and replace with your own. In fact, if you removed all of our extensions, what you would see is a blue bar at the top of a white screen. So that's how far it goes.
Doesn't sound very helpful.
You can even change the color of the blue bar if you want.
Well, here's a question that leads on from that. What are you looking forward to next? Hopefully not a lot of people just removing all the work we've done and changing the color of the top section menu. Bjarke, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I'm really happy about the fact we have moved so much business logic into the service layer. It makes it way more solid and easy to use the service layer to do operations programmatically. So whether it being creating content or whatever it could be, now it's harder for you to create invalid content that basically shoot yourself in the foot later.
How about you, Jacob?
Yeah, well, this is just the start for us. We're not finishing anything. In fact, our developers are already working on 14.1 at this point in time. So releasing this is obviously a huge milestone, and we will pause shortly to celebrate that. And then we're already working on the next thing. And now that you could say finally have a modern platform to stand on, we can do all of the things we'd wished we could do for years and years. We can change the UI, and we can introduce a whole lot of new things and stabilize it even more and make the developer experience even better for all sorts of developers with the back office, without breaking packages and other extensions, I should mention. So that was one of the pitfalls of the way we did it before. But we're not there anymore. We look forward and to all the things the future will bring.
Indeed, I just want to say a few thank yous, because as you can imagine and appreciate, this has been a massive team effort from everyone at HQ. So thank you to everyone there. We owe gratitude to the back office community team that was started quite a long time ago in this journey, perhaps when you started, Jacob. And the current team's pictured here. Sorry, Sophie, your picture wasn't there. And previous team members as well. Thank you to them for all their input along the way. And we've had a lot of community support as ever. We've had some early adopters who've really helped out since the beta releases. Really, Kevin, Marcus, Warren, Richard, Rick, and Biana. And also people who have been testing RCs, raising issues, making code contributions, the community package team, other package developers. Truly appreciate everyone's input. All good videos have a call to action, and in this one, it is please go and use Umbraco 14. When you go to the Our download page, it's got a new design to help you understand that this is the version 13 is the LTS, and the latest features are on v14 with installation instructions for both. Cloud is ready and waiting for you to install v14. If you have any questions, well, the good news is that Code Garden's coming up, and Bjarke and Jacob both were meant to say earlier that they're looking forward to seeing you and talking to you about this at Code Garden, but they forgot, so I'll say it for them. But
Thank
please,
Great.
you're welcome. Definitely talk to the people involved who've been working on this. They really do want to hear from you. You can ask on Discord if you have any questions, and if you find any issues, raise it on the CMS GitHub repo like you do usually. And with that, we just say thank you for trying v14 and let us know how you get on, and see you at Code Garden. Thanks all.
See you.
Bye.
Yeah.